Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and I was asking around to see if there were some opening odds for a lot of Worlds 2021 futures, and somebody in the esports department Discord had some numbers. I don't think that they're really the most up to date numbers necessarily. I don't know if they're actively changing them all the time and how much action they actually get on them, but it's a good starting point for Worlds. So I want to talk a little bit about the different teams that we will be seeing at Worlds and the odds for them to win. And I'm going to preface this by saying this is mostly like a research video for me where I'm still working through a lot of my thoughts, but I think it's a good way for people to see how I think about these kinds of things. And it will allow you to do something similar if you want to try to come up with your interpretations of how strong the teams are relative to one another on your own. So there are some implied win rates that you need to hit in order for these to be profitable bets. Otherwise, you're kind of just not making great bets. And I think that, World's futures, I don't expect there to be much value in betting them. But we'll take a look at all of them. I'm also going to do some team definition stuff where I'm trying to I'm trying to think to myself, do I believe in the team as an early team or a team that's going to be a scaling team? That'll be beneficial when we actually start seeing matchups and start asking ourselves, if stylistically, how do these two teams line up? And does that mean one team is more likely to have a tempo advantage because of how I expect them to draft and things like that? And then I'm going to see what I think about top side versus bot side for their drafting. And just how they approach the game generally. Sorry about that. So I mean, we can just start in the LPL. The LPL is the best region in the world right now. You can bet on the region to win Worlds at minus 149, which is about 60%. So in order for this bet to break even long term, you need to do better than 60%. I don't think I would bet it at 60%. I mean, in the semifinals and finals, depending on which teams are in there, you might be able to get minus 150. And instead of hanging your money out there for a month and a half or 2 months, you can just bet in the last match. Now, if it's a lopsided match, then yeah, maybe you're not going to be able to get much better number. If you go into the finals and it's an LPL team against an LCK team and it's minus 150 versus plus 150, you might as well just wait, is what I'm trying to say. But let's take a look at the first team. So the first team is EDG. EDG is the first listed team because of the stuff that I was looking at, but they don't have they don't have the best odds from the LPL. That's FPX. But we're going to start with EDG because they're on the top. So in terms of team style, I do think that EDG is a little bit of a slower team. They don't necessarily play hyper aggressive in the early game trying to carve out advantages that way. They have done it in the past, and a lot of it depends on what their win conditions are from the draft. But ultimately I think that it's really just a team that's built around Viper, and it'll be interesting to see what the meta looks like by the time we get to Worlds, because if it's a lot of hyperscaling AD carries, which we've seen a little bit of more recently, then EDG should be in a good spot. Flandre is a good top laner. He was a very good top laner, a very good carry top laner, but now it's more of fitting themselves within the team. It's not going to create a huge advantage for EDG to play through top lane most of the time. Yes, you can get a draft where Flandre has a beneficial lane matchup, can stomp the lane matchup, and then snowball into late game, but more often I think they're focused on going early. For that reason, I think it's a bot side team. I think that they'll focus on bot side for the most part because, like I said, Viper is really the best player on their team, and why would you not play around the best player on your team? If we go to Worlds and they're not drafting around Viper, then I will be actively picking against EDG, because that'll just mean their read on the meta is that they can't play through their best player. And if that's the case, then I don't think they're going to win the championship. So for that reason, I also think that we're most likely going to see them play a scaling type of their playstyle tendencies are more like scaling. So when I say something like scaling, they're just a lower kill score team in general, which is fine. It's more about like positional and macro than it is about team fighting and being mechanically better than everybody else. In terms of elite players, I think that Viper is the only elite player on EDG. Flandre is good but not great. Not a difference maker. Same thing with Jai. Same thing with Scout. I mean, Scout was an elite player at one point. And relative to a lot of the other mid laners that are at this tournament, they'll probably be one of the best mid laners at the tournament. But I don't think that they are as good as the best mid laners that are at the tournament. So I think, like, semantically, like, I just can't put Scout into the elite tier. So let's go to the next one. So FPX, earlier scaling. I think they're kind of a hybrid of both. A lot of the time it depends on their draft, but it's like they're always looking to exploit the draft to carve out these big advantages in the early game and the mid game through do and be a lot of the time. They are definitely a topside team, especially now that they have Nuguri in the top lane. So right now, it's a very good meta for FPX because Kennen's an important champion, and Nuguri is probably the best Kennen in the world. So in terms of who they generally play around, Do and B is the most important player on the team, but a lot of the times they're not necessarily the carry of the team. Like, their job is to create plays and let the other teammates kind of shine. Now, Do and B does have the upside of crazy performances, but you'll also see Do and B playing like more supportive champions, which is pretty frustrating when you see something like that and they lose. Tian has been playing well. He's been playing Viego, which I don't think that they initially picked up Viego as fast. If Graves comes back in the meta, that's a bad thing for FPX. FPX struggled when it was a Graves meta. But I think in terms of elite players, I think that Nuguri is definitely an elite player. Do and B is an elite player. I don't think that LWX is at this point. I don't think that Crisp is. So it's really Nuguri and Do and B. And I could even be like on the fence about Nuguri. I think that they are one of the best. It's kind of the same thing with Scout. They are one of the best players in the world at their position, but I don't think that it's necessarily like they are creating these gigantic edges in their game, because that's not their role within their team. If you were actively playing around Nuguri every single game, it would look different. But that's just not how that's not how FPX goes about their games right now. So that's that. They have a 30% chance to win the championship at plus 236. You're probably not going to want to bet that. Doesn't seem like a good idea. RNG, I think of RNG as more of an early team. They are always looking for early game advantages, and a lot of their games get like pretty out of control with kill scores. So I think of them as an early team. Top side or bot side, it's funny, like they're definitely they should be a topside team, but a lot of the times their play style, the way that they act in the game, is more of a topside kind of team style, but their drafting is more bot side when it comes push to shove, because there's a lot of matchups where Xiaohu, instead of playing a carry champion, they're going to put Xiaohu on Gragas top or something. Just something like something stupid. They do it not all the time, but when it's like a high pressure situation, they do it more than I would like to see. I think that Wei is a pretty good player overall. Cryan received a lot of like criticism in the early part of the season when RNG was kind of underperforming. I think Gala, I've said this in a lot of my other videos, I think Gala is probably the most overrated player in the world right now, which isn't to say that they're a bad player, but they are not anywhere near as good as what people have kind of been saying recently. Like they talk about Gala as if they are a special player, and they're just not a special player. Like if you watch somebody like Viper, if you watch somebody like Huanfeng, like they're just better at League of Legends than Gala. Like Gala's at their best when Kai'Sa is a super strong champion. It's not that they're a one trick, but they're not a one trick. So ultimately that's going to lead to Gala being somewhat champion and draft dependent, which isn't a bad thing. It's not a bad thing for your chances to win a tournament like Worlds. It's just I'm not going to put you in the same stratosphere as those other 80 carries, which I think are just better. So in terms of elite players, I think that Xiaohu is really the only elite player on RNG. I think that that's probably accurate. Like you can't have that many elite players on your team. And some teams have 0 elite players on their team. So that's that. LNG is interesting because they play for a lot of laning advantages, but they have the low kill score games and they are more of a scaling team. I think that their drafting is very good in general. They have very diverse champion pools. Ale can play carry champions, can also play tank champions, can also play champions that are just expected to go 50-50 in the laning phase and let someone else on their team carry the game. So obviously that's not necessarily an elite player. I wouldn't be shocked if we were put into a spot where LNG was able to draft and put Ale into really good positions against these other top laners who we think of as more talented than Ale, and like let them win a match, or let them win like the laning phase and have these like huge pop-off performances. But it's not the identity of their team. So I should put topside there. Tarzan is probably one of the best junglers in the world. Again, this team was built for Tarzan, basically. I think they're more of a bot side team. And you'll see a lot of scaling teams are more about bot side because you want to reduce the variance in the early game to give your AD carry enough time to become more powerful, to become the most powerful player in the game. But Tarzan is really the playmaker and the one who dictates the tempo of the early game for their team. A super good player. The whole Griffin thing will be a big storyline around Worlds at this point, because they had a lot of good players. They had Viper, they had Tarzan, but they like mismanaged their organization and like everything kind of disbanded. I think Light has the chance to be an elite player from like a mechanical perspective, but that would just like an increase in opinion of Light would just push them closer to Gala. I think Light is as good, if not better, than LWX right now. But again, if you're not a tier different from the people that you're playing against, it's just really going to come down to the draft for the most part. So that's just kind of the way it is. But 2,400 is pretty interesting. 4%. Do I think they could win more often than 4% of the time? If they have an early... If they make it through the play-in stage, get into a good group, they could win their group, potentially. Like, I could see them being pretty competitive with a lot of the other teams. I just don't know if I want to bet LNG at plus 2,400. Like, am I going to bet $100 to win 2,400 bucks on LNG? Maybe. That's not horrible. So if like you remember back to last year, I don't think that Sunning's odds were this long because they were playing really well in the LPL playoffs and everything like that. LNG making it through the gauntlet. They beat World Elite. I wish World Elite made it. I think that would have been an interesting team at the World Championship. But they have just been on a huge losing streak recently. So with LNG, I was talking about Tarzan. So Icon's a good player, really a control mage player, but this season specifically, they've played a lot of assassins and other types of carry champions, which shows that they have another dimension to their team. LNG is the type of team who people will be shocked at how good they are when they play against teams from the LEC, LCS, the minor regions, and even some of the LCK teams. I think people will be really surprised by how like explosive LNG can be. It's just they know that they are not as good as some of the other teams in China, so they can't necessarily play that way. They can't really play that way in their own region. But when you get to an international competition, you'll really start to see the talent difference between a lot of these regions, I think. So that's that. All right. LCK. So in the LCK, they have a 39% chance to win the championship at 154. I don't think that those are bad odds, but like I said, this is basically what you would want to bet if you want to bet on Damwon, but you also want some other outs. Like the fact that HLE doesn't even have a number posted yet is interesting, but I wouldn't be shocked if Damwon made another run to the World Championship. I guess I wouldn't want to bet the plus 150. I'd probably want to bet these two numbers right here, and then in the finals you can hedge against that. If it was Damwon against Gen.G, like would they be minus 200 favorites? You might have to bet a lot of money to hedge out of it, but that's I think that's probably the better way to go. So for Damwon is another team that's kind of both. They can play the game both ways, but they're better off being a topside team, specifically playing through mid and jungle. They can create the advantages, but the advantages that they carve out in the early and mid game often aren't like kill based. They are macro based, which is something that you'll generally see from scaling teams. But when Damwon Gaming has to kind of exert additional pressure in the early game, they always have a chance to kind of blow teams out of the water as well. It's just that their drafts don't really always let them do that. They have to be a little bit more reserved. Khan, I don't think Khan is an elite player right now. He hasn't really been as good recently. They did announce that this is going to be their last... They announced something. I don't know if it's retirement or if they're just not playing in Korea anymore. I don't know what that news was, but there was news about it, so you might want to look that up. Canyon is probably one of the best junglers in the world. They're definitely elite, so you got to throw them in there. Showmaker is definitely an elite player. Ghost and Barrel, I don't think are elite players. Ghost and Barrel are big beneficiaries of the drafting that Damwon typically has, and the amount of pressure that their top side exerts. So although sometimes you'll see Ghost have really good performances in terms of KDA, I don't think that they're really the ones creating that advantage for their team, and for that reason I don't really consider them an elite player. Let's just go to Gen.G. So with Gen.G, they are a bot side team, and they are more of a scaling team, but they do have a lot of bloody games. So I don't know. That's more of a difficult one. The reason I would kind of lean towards scaling is because I expect teams to play slower at Worlds, which is just something that normally happens. I think it might have been pretty fast last year, but that's kind of not typical. Rascal is a good player, but I don't think they're an elite player. They remind me of like the Flandre Khan level of player. Clid, good jungler, not an elite jungler, I don't think at this point. They definitely can carry from the jungle. It's just that's not how their team is really built. BDD, same thing. BDD is borderline elite. I know that people thought BDD was like, it was like BDD and Chovy were considered the best mid laners until Showmaker kind of went out of control. Like it was BDD, Faker, Chovy, and then I guess last year or a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Showmaker just kind of took over. But BDD is still a very good player. Maybe not elite in the way that we should be talking about elite at like an international competition. Ruler is definitely an elite player, and Ruler is somebody who Gen.G is going to play around and should play around at the World Championship, because if you can get Ruler into consistently strong matchups and draft for Ruler, Ruler could carry Gen.G to a world championship, I think. It's going to be kind of matchup dependent, like what other teams are they playing against? Do the other teams have strong bot lanes as well? Are both teams going to be drafting around bot side? Because if you get too much attention attracted down there, it'll be more difficult for everybody to kind of just play the game. For T1, T1 is really more of a scaling team when they're at their best. They are good at playing around specific breakpoints in games, and having somebody like Faker on your team obviously helps that. In terms of top side or bot side, I don't know if I can really say either one. They're kind of ambiguous at this point. And if you have a different opinion than me, feel free to share it in the chat. I'd be interested to see what people think. I think that Kana is borderline elite. I just don't think that they get drafted around enough. Like it's another player. I think Khan, Rascal, Flandre, Ale, all pretty similar level in terms of talent. Wunner, I don't know enough about Wunner at this point to say whether or not they're elite. I would think probably not. Faker was the best player in the world, but if I had the choice of taking Showmaker, Chovy, or Doinby, I would take all three of them above Faker now. So maybe elite isn't the right word at this point for Faker. Teddy and Gumayusi, the fact that both of them play, I think, means necessarily that neither one is elite. I do think that Keria is an elite player, and I'm going to put Keria on here, but I know that most people who play DraftKings are going to be kind of like puking in their mouth because Keria generally has very bad kill scores, but the player is just like out of their mind. Like they are probably the best support in the world in terms of playmaking ability and understanding of the game, but we don't always get to see that in like an easy to see kind of way. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. So there's that. For HLE, they don't have their number up on the website yet. Chovy at this point is the only elite player on their team. Morgan, I really think I'm kind of surprised that Morgan wasn't able to take like solidify their position as the starting top laner earlier on, because they've always been a very skilled player, and I think that they showed that when they were in the LPL, even though that their team wasn't doing very well. Willer, I don't know enough about Willer. Like I try to watch as many games as I can, but I just don't have enough information on that player yet. Chovy has been an elite player for multiple seasons now, so Chovy's obviously one of the best players in the world. 1 second. Yeah, Chovy was another player on Griffin. So just think about that. Griffin had Tarzan, Viper, and Chovy. Like, that's crazy. They also had Lehens, and I forget who their top laner was. But Griffin was so good. They were so good. And they just were completely mismanaged. And feels bad. They are a mid lane team. They're not a top side or a bot side team. They are a mid laner team. That's about it. But I do think that lends itself more towards a top side. In terms of scaling, they do generally play slower, so I think it's more of a scaling team. That's not really going to be beneficial for them. Like the thing that team style is most important for is if they are the favorite in the match and they're able to dictate how they want the game to go, that's the avenue I think they would try to win the game. If they get into the draft and the other team picks a very early game team composition and tries to fight them in the early game, they may win the early game, but they're not intentionally drafting around that. Let's move on to the LEC. And people are going to be mad because I'm not sure how many more elite players there are to really talk about, but we'll get some players that are close to it, I guess. So the LEC, 10%. Do I think that the LEC wins the World Championship 10% of the time? I would say no. I would say you're better off just picking whichever team you think has the best chance to win the World Championship from the LEC if you really are going to make that kind of bet, which seems, pretty sketchy. You'd probably be able to bet this during the World Championship after a few matches as well, so you might want to just wait. I don't think that any of these numbers are super good at this point. So Mad Lions, they do kind of play. It depends on they play through multiple players on their team. Overall, I think they're truly a bot side team where it's normally Carzzy is the person that they want to have a lot of that playmaking upside on their team and the ability to pop off like out of control. Elyoya, specifically in the farming meta, was very good, but I think that Elyoya is pretty overrated right now as well. Like there's high expectations for them because the reason why they're on the team is because last year Shadow had a bad performance at Worlds. So can they do better than they did last year at Worlds? I think it's possible. I don't think it's likely because they're still not as good as a lot of the other teams that are out there. I think that the real problem was Arome last year. So the fact that they have Armut is going to make a much bigger difference. And the way that they draft around Armut a lot of the times, it's going to be, like a scaling champion against a scaling champion for the top lane. Maybe like if the other team picks Jace or something, then Armut will be able to play Wukong, which is actually, one of their better champions. But in order for Armut to beat a lot of the other top laners in this tournament, they're going to have like the draft go incredibly well for them. Elyoya, there's not a high chance that Elyoya is going to consistently get advantageous jungle matchups. For the most part, it's probably going to be like teams saying the meta is going to like work itself around 2 to 3 different jungle champions. If those are like tank jungle champions, like if we get into a tank meta at Worlds in the jungle, then a player like Elyoya is going to be completely wasted, and you're going to have to see like Mad Lions come up with unique ways to get more carry upside out of the jungle, because that's really how their team is built. Their team is built around letting Elyoya or Carzzy carry. I don't think any of them are really elite players. I think that Carzzy could theoretically be an elite player, but like if you told me, would you rather have Carzzy or Teddy? Carzzy or Gumayusi? I'd probably just take Teddy or Gumayusi. If you said, would I rather have Carzzy or Ghost? I think that Carzzy is a different style of player than Ghost. Carzzy is more willing to take on the playmaking role for their team, whereas Ghost is more of like a sit in the background and let the rest of the team kind of carry. I'd probably rather have Ghost because of their play style, even though the talent might be somewhat close. I think Humanoid's going to probably struggle at Worlds. It's funny because a lot of these teams have similar champion pools to Humanoid, and that's just going to exacerbate the issue more. Like Humanoid and Niski are pretty similar players in my mind, and they're just lesser versions. Like they're worse. They're just worse players than the other mid laners, and like the picks that they have that are somewhat less popular in their regions are actually popular in other parts of the world, and they just don't play it as well as the other teams. So yeah, just not a good spot for them in that regard. And as the underdog in a lot of these matchups, they're probably going to feel like they need to play early game, or they need to play late game and over index into one side of them instead of being able to have an identity for themselves. It's going to be like, how do we play opposite of what the team that we're playing against is doing? Because if, let's say, Mad Lions was a scaling team, if you're a scaling team and you're going up against a better scaling team, then you're probably better off playing early game, because even though it's not your preferred play style, you're not as good at the other play style as the team that you're playing against. So you kind of are just better off trying to counter what the other team is trying to accomplish. They are very aggressive. I think hopefully they can just like play a lot for early game and have explosive games. I think Fnatic is an early team, which is interesting because like Bwipo and Upset can definitely be seen as like late game players. I think Upset is like a archetypal or a prototypical one of those. He's one of those where he's just like the quintessential AD carry. Let me scale and don't pay much attention to me, and then if the other team tries to force plays and I get a couple of kills, then I can snowball out of control. But Upset is not normally the person making the big plays for Fnatic. That's generally Hylissang or Bwipo. Bwipo attracts a lot of attention. I think Bwipo is a very good player. If Bwipo was a jungle their entire career, I could see myself maybe thinking Bwipo was elite. If it's like a tank meta, I think that Fnatic could be like sneaky good because it will allow them to scale more easily, and it'll give Bwipo the chance to like play a bunch of different champions, which is one of Bwipo's strengths. They are a topside team in terms of like how they try to create their advantages. I'm not a huge fan of Fnatic in general, but you know, I'm not completely unreasonable. Like I get how they might be able to win some of these matches, and it would be fun if they actually were able to win some of these matches. Rogue, I think that Rogue is probably being slept on right now because they had a pretty bad performance throughout the year. I do like this number for Rogue. I think that it'll be very tough for Rogue because again they're more of like a slow scaling type of team. The reason why they get such huge advantages and seem like they might be an early game team sometimes is because the other teams in the region always felt obligated to kind of force the issue in the early game. I think that they are a bot side team when they're at their best. I think that Han Sama is the closest thing to an elite player that could be competitive with like the other regions because we've seen it before. Like Han Sama has that insane upside where they can carry their team against very good competition. But again, I don't think that these are like truly elite players. Like there are just better 80 carries from the other regions. I think that Viper and Ruler are just heads and shoulders above somebody like Han Sama. In the LCS, I am not betting on the LCS to win the World Championship. But they are somewhat interesting. I think that they're definitely a scaling team, and when they're at their best, they are a bot side team. I think when Someday came over to the LCS, Someday was one of the best players in the world at their role. Closer, very good player. Not elite, but Closer is probably my... I think a lot of the junglers from the West are actually pretty good. They're just not as good as Tarzan or Canyon, which is going to be a problem. But like I said, a lot of the talent stuff can get eliminated in the draft. Like if your team just does a really good job in the draft, it's going to make you look like you're elite. I need to take off this hoodie and I need to turn on my air conditioner higher. 1 second. Pretty humid. Okay, so where was I? 100 Thieves. So Someday at their peak was probably an elite player in the world. Closer is not elite now, but Closer is a very good player. Abadage, I do like Abadage. I think when they're at their best, they're a good scaling player. FBI and Huhi, I think they're actually like they've grown on me over time. I've always been somewhat down on FBI, but their ability to navigate the laning phase is probably inflated in my mind because of the competition they're playing against. But if they can do the same type of thing at Worlds and keep the games relatively close, you know, they are a good draft away from beating some of these other teams. And that's really what separates teams in my mind is do they need to win the draft to win a match? And for a lot of these teams, I would say the answer is no. Like they're probably going to go for like 50-50 matchups in every role, and then they just trust themselves to outplay. A team like 100 Thieves, I think it's more about you either need to draft for the early game to create a large enough edge in that early portion of the game to get a lead that you can snowball. No elite players, but 100 Thieves is a team that could look very good at Worlds, I think, if they're able to navigate the early game well enough. And again, that's going to come down to drafting, probably. So, not really it's not something that I think is likely to happen, but it's interesting to me. Team Liquid is Team Liquid is a complete enigma in terms of how they approach League of Legends. What they do generally is they draft early game champions and basically try to carve out a very small lead through the laning phase. Like, because they'll draft early game AD carries, like early game aggressive topside champions, and then it'll be a very low kill score game because they're trying to strangle out the opponent and not let them like contest a lot of their objectives through the draft, which is an interesting play style. But when you're playing against these better teams, you need to be more aggressive. So that's always something that concerns me with Team Liquid. As a team that drafts the way that they do have good upside for DraftKings when they're an underdog, but it's just it's such a weird approach to the game. I think at their core, they will probably play through bot lane, but they could also play through top lane because like they generally want to get Alphari on a carry champion, and if you have a top laner like Alphari who is a carry player, you should be playing around them. I just don't know if it's going to be an actionable like thing to do against a lot of the other top laners because Alphari is a good top laner, but they're not a great top laner compared to other top laners at this tournament. And that's something that's going to be interesting to watch because if you're a player like Alphari and you've basically held your entire team hostage and forced them to draft around you all the time, there is a very good chance that you get a game with like Team Liquid against FPX, and FPX just like picks any champion for Nuguri, thinking they can just go even in the laning phase and will be relevant in the late game. If Alphari gets like a very good scaling champion and then has their team play around them, they could smash like an entire game, and then people are going to be like, "Oh my God, Alphari beat Nuguri! Like, what an amazing player!" When it's really just it depends on the draft and how your team actually executes that in the game. So it's definitely possible that we see something like that. It's just it doesn't make Alphari an elite player. It means that he's a carry player that can have a good game, and maybe that's a cop out, but that's just kind of how I see League of Legends. So Team Liquid is really a bot lane team. They're at their best when they're playing through Tactical and Core JJ. I'm feeling somewhat limited by this category. C9. So C9 is kind of similar to Team Liquid, I guess, in the sense that they draft for one thing and then kind of play another way. C9 will often have like Sven on a utility AD carry that's good in the laning phase, and then have a scaling champion in the top lane, scaling champion in the mid lane, and then have Blabber on a champion that can kind of be competitive in the early and mid game. They've been playing very poorly, I think, for the entire year. In terms of just pure talent, I do believe in C9. This is probably one of the best. This is one of the best teams in terms of talent that the West has ever sent to a world championship, but they're not playing well right now, and it's unfortunate. But I think that the whole Perks thing with his eyes is like really, really bad. I don't know if that's going to be able to be fixed by the time that Worlds happens. So that's pretty concerning to me. If you showed me this lineup before the season started and we didn't have any issues with like Perks having big vision issues, I would bet that number in a heartbeat. Like, I don't think that it's very likely that C9 wins Worlds or something, but this would at least put you into a spot where maybe you get into the semifinals and you can hedge against it and feel pretty good. Because I do think that C9 has that kind of upside if all of the players are playing well and not like severely injured, which might be the situation with Perks. They're a topside team. It's basically like your team will always have some players that need to get the short end of the stick in the draft, where they're just not that they're not the player that you're drafting around, and they have to deal with a lot of bad drafts. That's basically Sven for C9, which is part of the reason why people have a low opinion of Sven right now. I will probably have to go through like the champions that are likely to be good at Worlds, but I don't know what patch they're playing on yet, and I don't know what the game is going to look like at that point. I hope that Amumu is in their like current form, because it's a lot of fun. It'd be very fun to watch at Worlds. But that's basically it. So that's 40 minutes of me talking about these teams. Like I said, a lot of these numbers don't feel very good to bet. Like, yeah, if you want to bet $100 on a team now, you can do it, but you can probably get similar value by just waiting during the tournament. And if like the teams that you want to bet are from the major regions, you're better off not picking like region. You're better off just waiting, because like these numbers, you're gonna get close to those numbers if you like bet them multiple games in a row during the knockout stage. So not a lot of good actionable lines out there for now. But that's all I got for you. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.